Our interview this morning is with Harold Brinkley. Harold was born in December of 1922 in Denison, Texas. He served in the Army Air Corps, January of 1943 through October of 1945. His highest rank attained was sergeant. This interview was conducted at Burleson, Texas on Friday, September the 24th, year 2010. My name is Dale Dexheimer. I am not related to Mr. Brinkley in any way. Also in the room are Milton Gibson and Gary Burton, who are our videographers. This interview is conducted for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress and Operation Remember for the city of Burleson, Texas. And with that little introduction, Harold, we'll let you tell your story of your time when you went in the service, how you got there, and what you did there, sir.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'd been married 7 months when I got my draft notice. Of course, went right on and took my basic training in Biloxi, Mississippi. And I was down there 5 weeks, which was kind of short for basic training, but they needed some gun fodder somewhere. And so they shipped us out, and of course I didn't have no idea where we were going. We got off in Denver, Colorado, off of the train in about a foot of snow. And all of us like froze to death before we got into the barracks. But we started the tech school right away. And we went through both Lowry Field and Buckley Field there in Denver. And then they shipped me to Laredo, Texas for gunnery school. And from gunnery school, they shipped me back to Clovis, New Mexico, and put me on a bomber crew. And we started flying our first phase of training. And we stayed there for about 4 months. And the rumor got going around that they were going to sack the base and ship us out somewhere else. And the major came out and told us he didn't want that rumor going around anymore. He was going to get in trouble if we kept spreading it. And then 2 weeks later, on the bulletin board that they was going to send all crew members to Pueblo, Colorado for 2 weeks while they sacked the base. And then they sent us back to Clovis and then to Langley Field, Virginia for our last phase of training. From Langley Field, Virginia, we went to New York City and was there about 5 days and picked up our airplane, flew to Trinidad, from Trinidad to Belgium, Brazil, from Belgium, Brazil to Dakar, Africa, from Africa to Algiers, and then from Algiers to Italy, Foggia, Italy. And that's where we flew our missions from. And I'll never forget my first mission. Of course, they had told us that we only had to fly 50 missions to get to go home. And so our first mission, they sent us to northern Italy. And all they had up there in anti-aircraft guns were 40-millimeter cannon. We were flying high enough that the 40-millimeter wouldn't reach us. It was exploding all down under us. And we thought, when we got back to base that day, boy, if it's all this easy, we can fly 50 missions in 50 days and go home. But then on our second mission, we was headed for Graz, Austria, to to bomb a ball bearing factory. And we got 10 minutes off of the target, and about 80 109s hit us and shot us all to pieces. We managed to fly back to the Adriatic Sea, and well, back up a minute. I think the last shell, or close to the last ones, set my oxygen supply on fire. I was a ball turret gunner, and I had just a rubber hose that fed my oxygen. And they shot this oxygen hose into and set my oxygen supply on fire. And we had some jackets with stuff behind the curtain that goes across the fuselage, and it all caught fire. And the last shell that hit, I think it was the last shell that hit our ship, hit the struts on my ball turret when I was standing right about this far away, and exploded in my face, blinded me in the right eye, and pretty well scorched my left one too. But I could see the fire. I managed to get hold of the fire extinguisher and start spraying, but I didn't have enough sense to know that with this oxygen hose flapping around there, I couldn't put a fire out. So I run out of stuff in my in that extinguisher, and so I started grabbing the stuff. I had on flat gloves, and I started grabbing the stuff and throwing it out the waste window, and also down the waste guns were mounted on plywood panels, and they were on fire too. And managed to tear up some of that plywood and throw it out the window. Finally got the fire snuffed out. And then our two waste gunners were laying in the floor, one of them hollering, "Mama, Mama." And so I went back to see how the tail gunner was doing, and he come out of the turret beating on his leg. And I asked him if he was hit, and he said, "No, I'm freezing to death." Of course, they had shot our heating system out and everything. And then I turned around, and one of the waste gunners had got up and was charging that machine gun, just kicking shells out of it right and left. He didn't even have no idea what he was doing. And then it wasn't too long after that till somebody, I couldn't see the ground myself, but somebody said, "Grab a hold of something, we're ditching." And so we had much more than, I grabbed a hold of my ball turret struts, and one of the guys grabbed a hold of the waste window, just a hole like that, and I can't remember what happened to the other guys, but anyhow, if it hadn't been that our bomb bay doors were open and the water coming through there as we went forward when we crashed, it would have killed every man in the back. But that water cushioned us and saved us. But I thought I was drowning, and I swallowed enough salt water. And my tail gunner, our plane, thank God, floated. It floated 7 minutes. The reason I know this is because some of us had watches that stopped when we hit the water, and the pilot and the co-pilot had better watches than us, and their watches were still running. And we got in when we got in the life rafts, they just before the plane sank, and the guys that were flying above us told us that we actually dove underwater when we hit the water, and then come back up. We caught enough air, I guess, in the bomb bays and what have you, to come back up. But anyhow, there we were about, I don't know how far from shore, but we could see the Germans on the Yugoslav shore trying to get in the boat to come out and pick us up. But there was enough planes in the air strafing that beach that they couldn't get out in their boats. So a British flying boat come out, picked us up, picked 5 of us up. That's all. It was just a small flying boat, and there was 10 of us, and they couldn't pick us all up, so there was 5 of us wounded, and so they just picked up 5 of us and took us, and then had to call another boat out there, and it took, from what I heard later, took quite a while before another boat could come out, but there enough planes stayed out to keep the Germans from coming out and getting the guys. And so they sent us to this British hospital. And of course, the next morning, they came in, and I was about to freeze to death. They covered me with every hot blanket they had, I think. But I was in shock, I guess. But anyhow, they brought in about a 10-gallon pot of hot tea. I never did like hot tea until then, and it was the best stuff I ever drank. But then they sent me across Italy to Bari to eye specialist. And I thought I'd lost that eye because when I looked in the mirror, it wasn't nothing but a pile of blood. And my other one was bloody, but at least I could see out of it. And that old doctor, he popped it out of my head and scraped the strap. I had 2 pieces of shrapnel about the size of a match head that went in right above my eyeball. And I stayed in the hospital 21 days and got my sight back. And they sent me back to the base, and when I got back to base, our officers had been flying with what they call an orphan crew, and when we got back to base, somebody had told a bunch of stories that wasn't true. But anyhow, he decided to keep 2 of his original crew and pick out 4 of this orphan crew to replace the rest of the guys. And so and you know, the weird part of it is, I can remember one mission we went into France because we got one of our engines shot off on that mission. But the rest of the missions between that one and the 13th mission when I got captured is gone. I can remember the flak, but I can't remember if we. And I can remember seeing some fighter planes in the air, especially our escorts, P-51 escorts. But I can't remember if we ever had another attack by fire plane. I can't. And how come we to get captured? We were scheduled for a brand new airplane. It had just got over. We went down to load the guns, and we got the guns all loaded. And the crew chief said, "Well, I feel sorry for you guys." Well, how come? He said, "This plane won't fly." How come? Why don't you ground it then? He said, "I've had it up 5 times, and I know there's something wrong with it, but put my finger on it so I can't ground it. Well, the next day we were socked in with fog and we couldn't fly, so we was tickled because they scheduled somebody else for that plane. Well, the next day they were fogged in, so we were back on it again. We went down the next morning. We went down that night and checked all the guns and everything. They were still in good shape. We got down there the next morning and 3 of the engines lit right up. But that 4th engine would not fire a lick. We cranked that thing, I don't know how long. But anyhow, by the time we got it started, it finally fired up. We got in the air, and we could see our group out in front of us, but we couldn't catch them. And the rules were, if we got into enemy territory a certain distance, I don't know whether you ever heard of the Zagreb fighter belt, but there was a belt of fighters all across the country, the conquered countries. And we had orders that if we weren't in our slot and everything percolating right a certain distance from that fighter belt, we was to turn around and come home. Well, our pilot almost drowned when we crashed in the Adriatic on that second mission, and he was leery. He was leery of that water. Every time we had to cross the Adriatic after that, he was shook up. So we got to that point, and then we turned around and started back. We was flying at 23,000 feet at the time, and we hadn't flown. I don't remember now how far up in there, but we were somewhere around 200 miles up into enemy territory when we turned around. But we turned around, and we hadn't much more than turned around and started back until one of the engines conked out. Black smoke just poured out of it, and it conked out. We flew on 3 engines for a while and tried to restart that one. Pretty soon another one smoked up, and it quit. We was flying on 2 engines. We started losing altitude. It just one after the other from there on back to the Adriatic. And when we got back to the Adriatic, we still had 13,000 foot under us. And our co-pilot, which was a captain, and our pilot was a first lieutenant, but the pilot had the authority. We got back to the Adriatic, and our pilot radioed us back in the back to bail out. And we could hear the co-pilot trying to talk him out of it. Let's fly this thing on home. And he said, I said bail out, and I mean bail out. And so we all began to bail out. My tail gunner bailed out first from the back, and the rest of the guys, we just followed them. And the pilot, I was floating down in my chute when, well, to start with, I bailed out of the back, and the bombardier bailed out of the front. And somehow or another, our parachutes got together. I looked up, and I had 2 chutes. And then I felt the weight on my back. And this guy, it wasn't our bombardier. Our bombardier had played off that day and went to the doctor, and we had a substitute bombardier. Well, we didn't even know him. And anyhow, he said, we better unwind here. So he rolled one way and I rolled the other, and we separated, and he was a big man. And I would just weighed 135 pounds at the time, and he just fell off and left me. And when I got down there, there was about 300 or 400 people down there, all of them armed. And I was, of course, seen them down there and scared to death. I was, 19-year-old kid. And anyhow, when I hit the ground, they had to climb some walls to get up there to me. And they told me that my comrade was down the hill there. They come up the hill hollering comrade, saluting, you know. And so we went down the hill, and there sat that bombardier. He had had a compound fracture in his left leg, just above about halfway up his knee. And he was sitting there just a-crying, boy, he was hurting. And he asked me to stay with him, and I said, well, I'll stay as long as I can. And so about that time, somebody showed up with a burro, and we put him on that burro. And of course, this whole crowd led us off down the hill because they knew that some more of the crew was down the hill, you know. And the pilot, he landed. He was the last one out of the plane, and he landed right in front of the jail in downtown. And they took us into a little rock hut there where there was a squad of German soldiers, and this German sergeant, he was the nicest guy you ever saw. He could speak English better than I can. And we got to talking, and we got to showing pictures, you know, of our families and what have you. And he showed us a picture of his family. He had 4 children and a wife, and he said they all got killed in a bombing raid on Burleson. He said, I don't blame you guys for it. Said, you're just like I am. You was told to fight, and you had to fight. And he was the nicest guy you ever seen. And there was an old man there trying to get him to turn us over to him. He had beard about that long, and of course we couldn't understand what he said. But the sergeant said, "Can you understand what the old man's saying?" No. He said, "He's trying to get us to turn you guys over to him." Said, somebody bombed his town about 2 weeks ago, and said he wants to take you. He said, "But don't worry." He said, "I'm not going to turn you over to him." And so, of course, in a little while there was a couple of officers come up in a car and took us down, put us in a jail there in the little town. And from there, they put us on a truck with, I can't remember for sure how many other German soldiers was on the truck too, but all their luggage was up in under this. It was a stake bed truck, and they had all their luggage up in under a tarpaulin, and that's where we had to stay, is up on their luggage, all 10 of us, and they rode in the back part, and I can't remember, save me, how long it took us, but we finally wound up in Frankfurt, Germany. They put us in solitary confinement there, and we stayed there. I stayed in there 2 nights, and this guy come in. This was 6 days after D-Day, and he come in there and said, "Well, what do you think of the invasion?" And I said, "I don't know nothing about no invasion." And he said, "Oh," I said, "they hit us at Normandy." Of course, Normandy was just a word to me. I didn't know where it was at. He said, "They hit us at Normandy with everything but the kitchen sink." He said, "It won't be long now." That's what he said. And he was just as jolly as he could be. And after he left me, and he asked me some bunch of questions. I can't remember what all he asked me. But anyhow, after he left, man, I was dying for a cigarette. But I didn't have no matches. I had cigarettes, but I didn't have no matches. They took all my matches. So I just thought, well, now, he acted pretty friendly. I'm going to see how friendly he is. So I turned the knob and it dropped the flag outside the door. And he came and opened the door and said, "What can I do for you?" I said, "Would you light a cigarette for me?" He said, "Why, sure, boy." And just lit me up a cigarette. This and I, well, I think it was the second day or maybe the third morning. I can't remember for sure. But then they come in and got me and took me into another room and set me down. And in a little bit, well, here come the pilot in there. Set him down. We sat there for 30 minutes, I guess. Then two German soldiers come in there and said, "Come go with us." And he and I got up and went with them. They put us on a train. It was on a troop train, and took off. And we was on there. I believe it was the second day. They come in and got him, and left me in there with two guards. You know, them trains over there got them little compartments, you know. And I was sitting in there with two guards, and I believe I was on the train either 4 or 5 days. I can't remember for sure. But anyhow, finally they took us off. We was about a mile and a half, 2 miles from the prison camp, and we had to they marched us that distance, and then of course they put us through a interrogation deal and all that, and then put us into the camp. And we was in the camp, and of course by that time I was kind of hungry. And all the world they had to feed us was cabbage soup. Man, we had cabbage soup every day. And we were supposed to get some Red Cross food parcels, but this commander had determined that we would, you know, the Geneva Convention, or so we were told, said that we were supposed to get a Red Cross food parcel a week unopened. But this commander of this prison camp said, "You ain't going to get them unopened." Said, "If you get them at all, you're going to get them a piece at a time." And so we finally, after 2 weeks, we decided that the guys that had been appointed leaders of the compound, they decided we'd take them any way we could get them. And so they started bringing them in, just 3 or 4 items a day, you know, out of this Red Cross food parcel, you know. And if there were anything in cans, like meat and stuff, they made them open them out in this warehouse and bring them in opened where we couldn't hoard them, see. And then we had to smash the cans and lay them out there so they could count the cans to make sure that we wasn't hoarding anything. So anyhow, went on there till, I believe, best I remember, it was the 9th of February in 45. They evacuated our camp. And put us on the road. There were 7,500, so they said. 7,500 guys put on the road that day. We had one compound of British. Some of them had been captured at Dunkirk. They had been in there 4 or 5 years. But they had already evacuated their compound. And so they put us on the road, and they told us that we would enter another camp 6 days. We marched 57 days before we got into another camp. And they changed guards. They turned us over to the Air Force guards in this camp that we went into. We stayed there 5 days, and they put us back on the road again. they put a bulletin up that all Air Force personnel would march out the next day. So, and we went by a warehouse there, and they issued us a bunch of little cloth sacks about this long. We didn't know what the world was in them, but that night, they'd never let us, the first 57 days we was on the road, they had never let us build a fire. But that night, about 4 o'clock that afternoon, while this commander that was in charge of us, of course, they had broken us up now. By that time, see, they kept us in big barns at night. Man, they got some of the biggest barns over there I've seen in my life. And they'd keep us in this barn. Of course, they'd rig us in there just head to toe and side by side. Of course, in the loft and everywhere. And of course, we got lousy. Boy, the lice covered us up. And it just drove us crazy in there. But anyhow, they put us back on the road, and that night they said, build you a fire and cook you some stuff. Said, you got some stuff in them sacks. So boy, it tickled us. And my friend and I, we buddied up, and we had got into a potato mound that we found along the road, and stole a bunch of little potatoes about this big. And I never will forget, that night I roasted and ate. Of course, you know, when you roast a potato in the fire, it gets crust around it. So they were mighty small. But I ate 38 of them potatoes that night, and my stomach was as hard as a rock, and it like to kill me. It just flat like to kill me. And man, there was guys moaning that night that you wouldn't believe. But anyhow, we survived, and the last I can't remember how many days, but we we was marching through a big cope of timber, thick, boy, I mean thick timber, and we noticed some of the guys had been just walking off in the timber. And guards wasn't saying a word to them. Well, the next morning, after we stayed there at a barn that night, the next morning this red-headed captain that was in charge of us, he called an assembly. And he said, fellas, I don't have to tell you this. Said, but I'm going to tell you. Said, I've done got a report this morning that 22 of your men done been killed. Walking off into the woods. Said, and just before we left that woods, there was a Panzer division bivouacked in that, just at the place that we went out. And he said, them Panzers is out in the woods looking for guys, and said if they find you, they're going to kill you, because they're looking for somebody to kill. And he said, now, we're surrounded. We can't get out. Said, we've been surrounded for several days now. Said, but my job is to keep you guys from getting liberated. And said, as long as it's my job, and as long as you stay in this column, he said, I can take care of you. Said, I've got the authority. But said, you walk off 6 feet from this column, and a Panzer sees you, he's going to shoot you. And so he didn't lose nobody else. And he said, I'll try to see that you get enough to eat to see the end of this war. And sure enough, he'd send a group of the guys with 3 or 4 guards, and they'd take off across the field and disappear. But that night when we got to where we were supposed to go, well, they'd have something for us to eat. And that's the way we survived it. And we was in this little village, the morning fixing our breakfast, and me and my buddy was over behind a little shed, and we heard a lot of hoorahing, you know, man alive. We didn't know what in the world was going on. So we ran around, and a British artillery outfit had come through town and told the guys that you're free, you're liberated, and said, but you've got to make your own way back to Lüneburg, Germany, because said we don't have no trucks or nothing to take you back. Said we marked the trail, and marked the road, and said you just have to get back there the best you can. Well, we was buddied up with 4 of us at that time, and 2 of them guys was nutty in the fruitcake. They went out that night and took a truck from some Germans. Come by the next morning and said, everybody wants to go to Lüneburg, Germany, hop in. So me and my other buddy, we hopped in. And we drove all that day and into the night and drove up into a little town. And the first thing we heard was a German talking. And we just knew that we'd been captured again. But it happened to be a German policeman. And he was telling the driver where to go. We went to a British hospital. They took us to a British hospital, and they took us in and said, fellas, said the only beds we got is in that stack of what you carry a guy on, and said you can put you one of them down on the floor, and there's a stack of blankets. Said that, well, man, I was wore out. All of us were, for that matter. But them 2 nuts that stole that truck, they went out and helped the MPs take stuff off the Germans. And the next day they come in, picked me and my buddy up in the neatest little car you ever saw, boy. And we took off in that. And finally we got to Lüneburg, Germany, and the British were there in charge. And they, of course, they issued us whatever clothing it had. Our clothing was in pitiful shape. And they issued us French tams and British jackets and all. We were dressed up crazy as you ever saw. We sure didn't look like GIs anymore. But anyhow, we found out after when we drove in there with this nice little car, of course, the British enlisted guy said, "Oh, if you drive on in here," well, I said, the officers will take your car. I said, "Why don't you just give it to us?" So sure enough, we was dumb enough to do it. And then the next day or so, we found out if we had this British officer told us if you had a car that's good enough, said you could drive all the way down through France to to La Havre, France. But we couldn't find our car after that. And anyhow, we finally, they put us on a DC-3 and flew us down to La Havre, France, and got a boat home. And that was, we were liberated on I was captured on the 31st day of May and was liberated on the 1st day of May of the next year. And
that's quite a story. Wow.
I'll tell you, when I think back, I can see God's hand in everything that happened. From the time I got in there, because I feel like if I had been in an infantry or something like that, I think I'd have went crazy. At least when I was shooting at somebody. I was shooting at an airplane. I wasn't shooting at a person. And I was sure thankful for that I didn't actually have to shoot a man.
Yeah.
I shot down 2 planes, and that's all the good I ever done.
Did they give individual crew members credit for shooting those planes down, Harold?
Well, I was dumb enough. This second plane that I shot down, the first plane I shot down, I powdered him. He come up under our belly, and I just turned my guns right on him, put him down. But the second plane, my tail gunner had crippled him before he broke away. The way them guys operate, about 5 of them line up on each other's tail. This guy turns his guns on, and when he breaks away, this guy turns his gun on. And if they get on you, they're going to put you down, that's all. And there's only 2 planes, so I was told when I finally got out, you know. I don't know how true it was, but when we finally got some information, I was told that out of our 18 planes that was in our squadron, in our group, only 2 of them got back to base that day. They put the rest of them down. That's what I was told. I don't know how true it was. But anyhow, the pilot, he's the only one that didn't come home. And I talked to some officers down at Le Havre, France, that was in the prison with him. And they said they was on the road too, just like the rest of us. And said he was 2 weeks before his bunch was liberated, he just disappeared. They didn't know what happened to him. And the reason I know that he'd done that is because after I got back home in Denison, I got 2 letters, either 2 or 3, from the government. I don't know how they found out or how they knew that I was the last one of the crew that had been with him. I don't know, or if they did. They may have wrote all the crew members. I don't know. But anyhow, they wrote me and asked me to explain in a letter the last time I saw him and all that stuff. And so I did, and also I wrote a letter to his folks. And I'm not real sure that all the other crew members got home, but I think they did, because I think the government would have said something about it because they said he was the one that didn't come home.
Couple questions here, Harold. You spent all your time in a B-24.
Yeah.
B-24 built right up here at Fort Worth.
Yeah.
You know, you hear all the stories about the B-17s and how bad they got shot up, but you were in some airplanes that really took a lot of punishment.
Oh yeah, yeah, man. You wouldn't believe the shape that our plane was in the day we crashed in the Adriatic Sea. You could look out. They had shot at least 10 foot off of the right wing. I mean, flat shot it off. Our right inboard engine was gone. I seen most of it. Of course, I was down underneath the plane, and I seen most of it falling. And when I crawled out of my turret and looked around, there was holes all over that plane. All the control cables were laying in the floor, flopping when the pilot was trying to steer the thing. And How it flew as far as it did, I don't know.
You had 10 crew members,
Yeah. Yep.
and you were the ball turret. You were on the bottom.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about that turret. How big was the turret, and how easy was it getting in, getting out?
Well, the turret had a hatch about, maybe 2 foot this way, and about 16 inches this way. And that's where you went in. It had a solid steel, about inch and a half steel seat in it. A 50 caliber machine gun mounted on each side. It was just a round ball of a deal. And I goofed up we couldn't actually chamber a load when we was down on the ground. So we had to charge our guns after we got in the air. Well, I fouled up. Instead of raising my guns up flat and charging them, I had them tilted, and when I charged it, my right gun dragged if you've ever seen a 50 caliber machine gun, the extractor dragged it out of the belt, and instead of dropping it in the bolt, it dropped it in the chamber, and it jammed that gun. So I just had one gun. And
when you fired those guns, you're in this, how big is this turret, 4 or 5 feet around?
Oh no, it wasn't that wide. It wasn't. Maybe 3 foot across.
Get a little noisy in there when you were shooting?
Who did it? I mean to tell you.
What about smoky? Get a little smoky?
No, it didn't. It had of course, it had a way the shells.
Ejected.
When he ejected it out of the bottom, see, it went right on. And I guess most of the fumes went out with a shell.
Did it shake you when it shot?
Oh man, that shook the whole ship. I mean, when we was firing, of course, that day, every gun on there nearly was firing because there was fighters all around us, like a bunch of flies. And you'd think it was going to shake the plane to pieces. It just really vibrated.
Couple more questions here. Your eye surgery, they took your eye out?
Yeah, he popped it right out on my cheek. I don't know how he done it, but man, it was just laying right out on.
You were awake?
Well, he deadened it. I mean, he.
But you were conscious?
Oh yeah, I was conscious.
And then he took these little 2 pieces of shrapnel out of.
Right above, it went in right above that eyeball. It's right through my eyelid.
Lucky by about that much.
Oh my goodness, man! In fact, it probably would have killed me if it went through my eyeball. It probably would have killed me.
Moving on to when you when you bailed out, the people on the ground.
Yeah.
I guess you never saw any partisans or underground people. These were all Yugoslavs who were.
Well, see, we were told in our briefings that there were 2 factions in Yugoslavia. One they called Chetniks, and one they called partisans. And they always told us if we got down where there were partisans was in control, they'd smuggle us back across the Adriatic to the base. But if the Chetniks got us, they'd turn us over to the Germans. Well, we just happened to bail out into I don't know what they were, but they told us that we'd love to see any kind of uniforms, because they just wore whatever they could get their hands on. Well, they were just always armed. They were armed, but they never bothered us or nothing. But when we was walking down this trail, after we'd picked up a couple of my crew members, while there was three young men in uniforms, they had pistols on. They just joined the crowd, marched right up behind us and took their pistols out and stuck in our backs and said, "Pistol, pistol." And of course we knew then we was captured.
You had 10 people in the crew. You all bailed out.
Yep.
Nobody hurt?
No.
Wow.
Nobody was.
So you didn't need any medical treatment when you were captured. You were all okay.
Well, now that bombardier that had the compound fracture in his leg,
Yeah.
needed, and he didn't get but very little medical treatment. We rode on that truck for I don't know how many days, but several days. They'd put us in jails at night, and then put us back on that truck in the daytime. And that poor man was his leg, as far as he could pull his pants leg up, was black. I mean, and if he didn't lose that leg, in fact, if he didn't lose his life, I'd be surprised.
Captured late May, liberated a year later.
Yeah, a year later.
So in all of these travels, trains, trucks, on foot, some of that was in the wintertime.
Oh yeah.
Cold?
Yeah, it was pretty cold. Of course, we was in the prison camp most of the winter, but the day we evacuated our camp, that night, we spent the night on a hillside that was about this deep in snow, and we had, between me and my buddy, we had 5 blankets. We had accumulated 5 blankets, and we spread 3 of them out on the snow and covered with 2 of them, and it was sloped enough that we'd wake up with our feet sticking out the end because we'd slide down. And that's where we spent the first night. And I never will forget it, because it was miserable. I mean miserable. But altogether they figured that we walked about 700 miles in 87 days.
Wow.
So sometimes they let us stay over at the barn a couple of days, rest up. But then there was times that we had to march maybe 30 miles in one day, because it'd be a restricted zone, and they'd make us march all the way across it, or get us out of the way.
One of the amazing things to me, Harold, about this whole story, you're talking about something that happened 66 or 67 years ago. Wow.
Yep.
And obviously you remember a lot of it in more than you can say.
At times I think of different things, like the one time we stopped at a barn, and two of the guys, they could see out in the field there was a big potato mound, and they crawled, sneaked out there, and of course I think the guard saw them. But anyhow, after they got out there and they was digging into this mound, this old guard that was right there close to us, he pointed out there and laughed, and he pointed his gun out there and he fired a shell over their heads. And boy, you talk about some guys getting back with the crowd. Them 2 guys really got back with the crowd. But them guards, actually, them after they turned us over to the Air Force guards, them old rascals, they were old to us. They were 40 years old or so. And they had actually watched for the Burgermeister, they called him, while we stole the chickens and the eggs. I never will forget, me and my buddy, I went into barn to try to, we'd go into barns and take wheat, and we found out we could boil wheat 3 or 4 times, and it'd pop open, you know, and make, especially if we had any sugar out of a Red Cross parcel, and it was awful good eating. But this white leghorn chicken come in there while I was getting some wheat, and I captured that chicken and took it up in the barn loft and plucked him. And we found a big old can out in the field there, and started boiling this chicken. And the Burgermeister and 2 guards come walking down through there. Of course, we walked off 20 feet from there and make sure that we didn't get caught. This old Burgermeister, he's come down through there stirring in all the pots, you know. Well, anybody with a half sense would know where a chicken was boiling, it's going to be grease all over the top. But he stirred in our pot for a little bit and then went on about his business. And he didn't, because he wasn't nobody standing around, so he couldn't accuse anybody. But it's a wonder he hadn't took our chicken, but he didn't. But stuff like that comes to mind every once in a while, you know. And it's actually funny now, but it wasn't funny then.
Harold, we appreciate you coming down today. It's a really interesting,
Well,
historic story that you have.
I appreciate you asking me.
You bet, sir.
I've got my brother-in-law's grandkids. He's got 4 daughters, and they all got 2 kids apiece. And if I ever go to see my brother-in-law and the kids are there, I've got to tell the story over to them. Man, they eat it up, and they get the biggest kick out of it.
We're going to give you a DVD so you can just take it and plug it in, and you can tell them the story.
That'd be nice.
We thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.